From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
Welcome aboard the Ear to There Podcast, the podcast that'll help you vacation like a pro in any Disney destination. For those of you standing, please sit down and hold on throughout our journey and get ready to learn how to have the time of your life. And now, here's your host, Phil Gramlich.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There Podcast. I am your host, Phil Gramlich. I am also the owner and operator of Ear to There Travel, which is a Disney-specialized travel agency. It's my job to take away all that stress, all that anxiety, and all that time that it takes to plan a Disney trip, so you can focus on the fun things like having a great time with your family and friends and enjoying the magic. Oh, and just like J-Lo's love don't cost a thing, my services don't cost a thing. Now you're going to have that song in your mind the rest of the day. Love don't cost a thing. And now you know why I'm not a singer. Okay. You can find this podcast, my blog, or request a free, no obligation quote over at eartotheretravel.com. All right, here we go. This is episode number 84 for the week of August 21st. That's right. August 21st, 2017. Now, grab a drink, grab a snack, and as a famous mouse once said, on with the show. I don't know about you, but I've always been fascinated by the history of Disneyland, especially as it relates to Walt Disney and how much of a hand he had in building the park. On my past trips out to the West Coast to visit Disneyland and Disney California Adventure, I've always found myself trying to walk where Walt Disney once walked. I am a complete nerd and I try to take pictures in the spots where I've seen pictures of him in the parks. And in general, I'm always just trying to find and touch the places that Walt Disney once touched. That's why this week I wanted to talk all about Disneyland in the days of Walt Disney. My guest in the show is an author who has written more than 100 books in his career. He's written about science fiction, football, including a book on one of my favorite Philadelphia Eagles of all time, Reggie White, and a few books about Walt Disney and Disney in particular. His newest book is called Walt's Disneyland. It's still there if you know where to look. Jim Denney, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
I'm so excited to have you. And I have to tell you, Jim, I listened to your How to Be Like Walt book that you wrote with Pat Williams. Mm-hmm. I listened to the audiobook a couple years ago. I have 4.5-year-old twins, and they were 2.5 at the time. And the only time they would nap is if the car was running. So I literally would listen to your book while I drove them around while they were napping. Friends. So yeah, I loved it. It was a great book. And I don't want to compare the two, but your new book is phenomenal as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Phil.
So, okay. So I saw the title of your book, and I was literally just browsing Amazon. And please don't take this as, don't be offended. I didn't put two and two together that you had written both. I put in Walt Disney book on Amazon, and I saw it, and I clicked on it, and I'm like, oh, I got to read this book. So I downloaded it that day. And then I bought 2 copies that I have on my desk that I'm actually going to give away to podcast listeners this week. I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. We'll figure it out.
That's great to hear.
But yeah, I loved it. And I just want to ask you, I have a ton of questions to ask you. But again, what I kind of want to touch on in this podcast is what's still in Disneyland from when Walt was there, like what he touched, what he worked on, what his fingerprints are on. So that's kind of what I want to get started with. Actually, when I want to focus on this episode, and I know you have a ton of stories and information and everything else. So I kind of, again, I went through your book, and I wanted to start with when Disneyland, when they first built it, when they first decided this, because this is one I didn't know, when they first decided on a spot in Anaheim to build the park, the Dominguez tree, I had never heard that story before.
Oh, did you see the Dominguez tree when you're there?
I did. I went because I had your book, and I went and I found it. It was right in the Indiana. Was it the Indiana Jones queue or the Fast Pass or something like that?
Yeah, right by the Fast Pass there.
Yeah, so
100-plus-year-old tree that's it's not where it originally was because it was originally out in the parking lot, but they moved it to its present location, and it is the oldest living thing there at Disneyland. So it's that's worth just looking, admiring, and then it's I don't know that there's much else to say about it, but it's kind of fascinating that it's so old, and it was there when it was all orange trees.
Yeah, and I've read that there were, I don't know, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, that they did keep some of the orange trees in the park originally, but they have long since kind of died out years ago.
As far as I know, there was only one orange tree that was originally on the property, and it was actually on the Disneyland Hotel property at the time. And then in 1999, when they cleared that out, I think it was 99. Anyway, when they were building Downtown Disney, that orange tree died about that time, and so out it came. And so that palm tree is the only thing that was there originally.
Wow.
The only thing that's still there today.
Yeah, that's really cool because it's so different than Walt Disney World, where a lot of it is still, just basically swamp and yeah. There's not a whole lot developed there. I mean, I remember the first time I went there with my family, and I was like, "This is all Walt Disney World. It's crazy." To compare that to Disneyland, where you can see the Matterhorn from the street.
Right.
I mean, I was my first time out there was 2008, and I remember. We checked in. We were going to the Grand Californian, that's where we stayed, and I was my wife and I were on our honeymoon, and I remember driving down. I think it was Harbor, and looking out of the Disney bus that we were on, and you could see the tops of the attractions from the street, and I was blown away because Walt Disney World's completely different than that.
Sure.
So yeah, it's very cool that that's all still there, and I love the story that I think it's in your book where Walt takes Art Linkletter to the spot where he's going to build,
right?
And asks him and tells him to buy the land,
right?
And
right.
I think it was. And he said, "You're going to make this land will be worth I don't know how many times. You can like correct me. I thought it was like 10 times or 20 times what he would pay for it."
Right. Yeah. Art told us that story because he wrote the foreword for How to Be Like Walt, which was published in 2004, the book I did with Pat Williams. And Art told us that story, and that was just amazing. His big Disneyland regret was that he didn't take Walt's advice. He thought Walt was going to lose his shirt out there and building this amusement park out in the middle of all these orange groves. And so he had no intention of putting his money at risk. But he said something like, every step he took with Walt walking on the Disneyland property, as Walt was showing him, here's where the castle's going to be, and here's where the train station's going to be, and here's where all these different attractions are going to be. Art walked through that whole area, and he said every step he took, he probably lost about $1 million by not taking Walt's advice. Yeah,
that's crazy. And you think about now what's out there, like. The opportunities that he would have had, and I mean it's nuts. And now Disney is affording to pretty much buy land around Disneyland, and they're they're expanding with Star Wars Land and they're building more. I don't know if this is true. I have a friend that works out there now that works in Disneyland, and he told me that when they were doing some clearing for Star Wars Land. There were actually, you could see some of the, I don't know, this is a story from someone else, but he told me you can actually see some of the old trails from where the mule pack rides would have been.
Oh,
They were like, it was like trampled down, like not dirt, I mean, not concrete, I'm sorry, but like dirt, and they're still there. Like you can actually see them backstage. That blew my mind. I mean, that hasn't been, I don't know off the top of my head when the last time they had mule rides through there. It had to be, the early 60s or the mid-60s, something like that?
Yeah, that would have, when did that, I think that ended around 63, 64, somewhere in there.
Yeah, so
maybe even earlier. I'm not sure.
It's crazy to think that that stuff is it still exists. When we were out there a week and a half ago or so, they have the entrances to where the Star Wars land is going to go, and there's little tiny holes in the wall on purpose so you can kind of poke your eye and look through. And you can't see much. I mean, there's like a little stagecoach back there, but I'm very interested in seeing how they're going to transition from Frontierland basically into Star Wars.
Yeah,
it's going to be from what I've been told that the rocks and everything. The color of them is going to kind of it's like a burnt, like an orange or a brown, and it's going to kind of transition into those types of rocks on that type of planet for Star Wars. But seeing it now and walking through the area where Big Thunder Ranch used to be, and it's basically a concrete rock wall there now. It was really strange because I was used to walking through and seeing, just grass and hills and water, and you don't see any of that stuff now.
Right.
So I'm interested. I don't know if you've been over there recently and have gotten to see that in the last little bit.
I've only really looked at it from the parking structure where you can look down and see a lot of the construction going on, but I haven't. My first time in Disneyland was in 1957. I was 4.5 years old or so. My folks took me, and my younger brother, and I still have memories of that. That really made an impression on me, even at that age. But when back in those days, you get off of it's now the Interstate 5. It was the Santa Ana Freeway in those days. You get off on the harbor exit, and it was a little 2-lane road, and there were orange trees. I mean, orange groves on either side of the road. It's just there was nothing around Disneyland in those days.
Wow.
And it's just I've seen some photo. I mean, my memories of that trip are being inside Disneyland, but I've seen photos of what Harbor Boulevard looked like in those days and things, and it's just amazing the transformation in Anaheim because of Disneyland, because of what Walt built there.
Yeah, I mean that city has major sports teams because Disneyland was built there. Like they owned the Mighty Ducks for a while, and they had a part ownership in the Angels. So it's crazy. I was thinking that actually when I was walking we stayed at the Disneyland Hotel on our last trip. By the way, I got totally lost trying to walk to the convention center. My friend who lives out there was like, "Yeah, it's easy. It's an easy walk." And I tried to use my map on my iPhone, and I was walking through parking lots. I didn't know where the heck I was, but just to see like the convention center and everything around it is all it's a city. It's not anywhere near what it could have been like back in the day and back then.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to talk to you about was because you mentioned it in the book, and it's something that I didn't know was how hands-on Walt Disney was in the days and actually the night before that grand opening of Disneyland.
Yeah.
When Ronald Reagan and Art Linkletter hosted the show, I had heard the stories that he was working late. I didn't know he was still painting the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit in Tomorrowland. Up until like hours before the park opened.
Yeah, he and Ken Anderson and I guess some other people were in there. They're trying to get I think what killed it was what made it so that the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit didn't open on time was that Anderson couldn't get the squid to operate. They had all the tentacles of the squid, and for some reason it wasn't. That was supposed to be everything was supposed to be moving, and they couldn't get that done. But Walt was in there with them, and he had a spray paint gun, and he was spray painting the backdrop, and they were trying to get that thing ready to open the next morning. And finally, they called it quits. And Ken Anderson, then they ran into some sort of a problem, electrical problem over at Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Ken Anderson went over there, fixed the problem, decided to take a nap and ended up sleeping through the whole opening day.
That's
back
awesome.
in the back of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading that too, and I was thinking about that, and like this guy, who's this Disney Imagineer who was responsible for building Disneyland, missed the entire opening day.
Yeah.
And what's weird too for me, because we were out last week, I had again super lucky. I had a friend of mine who works there. He got us in to see Walt's apartment, and I read in your book that I didn't know that he slept in the apartment. I want to say that night, but I doubt he got a whole lot of sleep.
Yeah.
But he went up there that night, and I read that right before I was, the day before I was in that apartment. And all I could think of was Walt walking down Main Street, in the middle of the night with the lights on and him climbing up the steps to that apartment, to that it's a pull-out couch. I can't believe that's, when we saw it in person, I was like, wait a minute, really? Like, I thought there was a bedroom somewhere in there. And it's this tiny little 500 square foot apartment.
Wow.
So yeah.
See, now I've never been there. My friend Peggy Matthews Rose has been there, and when she was working there, she sort of set up things when they had meetings there and so forth. So she'd get the place ready for the meetings. But I've never been there. I should be interviewing you about the apartment. So,
yeah,
because boy, I want to hear all about this.
Well, my kids were able to go, which I was blown away by. Because again, they're 4-year-olds, 2 4-year-olds and a 6-year-old. And I was so nervous that I was like, because my buddy was like, yeah, they can come up, no problem. So
tremendous.
We had a VIP guy take us up, and she actually made me, which I was fine with, but she made me hang my camera on Walt's coat rack. And she said, there's no picture taking today. Turn off your phones and hang up your camera. So I was like, oh, that's fine. So I got to use Walt's coat rack, not for my coat, but for my camera, which is cool. And then we walked around, and the funniest story was, we saw, they show you the room, and they show you, you look out the window with the lamp, and you look down at the town square. We walked out to the patio, and we were outside looking down, over the fence into the town square below, and looking at the entrance, and just it's this incredible feeling, and that knowing that this was Walt's little private sanctuary. And then became the weird part of the tour when she took us to his bathroom, and I said to my wife, this is a little weird, we're in this guy's bathroom. It humanizes Walt to an amazing degree, but I was like, I feel like I'm invading his privacy.
Yeah.
But the reason she did it was to show us that he had 4 shower heads in his bathroom that were installed in 1955. And I was like, that's amazing that this guy, we see all the technology and that audio animatronics and all this stuff that he did. But here he had 4 shower heads built into one wall in his shower in the 50s. I can't imagine that was the norm anywhere.
No.
So, but my son sat on a chair in the apartment, and I nearly had a heart attack. I think our poor guide almost, he's tired. He's 4 and he sat down. Yeah. I was like, get up. Yeah. Get off the chair. But yeah, it blew me away to think that, he walked down Main Street, that night, climbed up the stairs to his apartment, closed the door, probably crashed on the couch and got up 2 hours later. And then that it puts that opening day into a completely new perspective for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm watching it, and he's got to be exhausted.
Yeah. I'm amazed that you actually I thought they'd have it roped off or something so that you can kind of peek in, but you actually went in, looked out the window, and that's the window where he stood and watched the first guests come into the park. He was standing there with all the Mouseketeers, and they were watching the people just stream into the park. And to be there in that kind of history, that's awesome. What an experience!
It was intense. It was really neat, and I'm never gonna forget that. And a guy actually showed us. She opened the cabinets and showed us, okay, these are Walt's glasses. This is what he used to drink out of, and here's his grandchildren's baby bottles that they would use, and it blew me away. It was so cool. So
talk about Walt's fingerprints. That's a place where I'm sure Walt's fingerprints are still there, and if you knew where to look.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I love that. I love that line that when you say that in your book, because that's something to me. It really resonates, like the fingerprints thing, like just everywhere in the park. Because again, Walt Disney World. Again, that's where my first trip, and I've been there. Geez, I was a cast member. I've been there hundreds of times, literally, and it doesn't have that connection. Like, it's just bigger, and it's not as intimate. And Disneyland, I want to talk about Main Street, because Main Street has. Yeah. It's so intimate. It's so small. And you can kind of, like, when you walk up, one thing that I noticed is when you walk up the stairs to the train station, there's that railing, and there's that picture of Walt with his hand on a railing looking at at City Hall. And I don't know, there's something about that makes me like, wow, like it's history. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So cool. So what I wanted to ask you about, like, so when you go, like, when you research a book like this, and do you, and I'm sure you talk, I mean, I was reading the quotes in your book. There were so many people that were quoted in it. And do you just keep going to the park every day? Is it something that you get just from talking to people on the phone? Like, how does getting all the research, getting all the information for something like this actually happen?
I grabbed from every source I could find. I was all over the internet. I was at the park. I was talking to people. My friend Peggy, who I mentioned earlier, she was a cast member there for a long time, and so she knew a lot. We had done a lot of interviews when Pat Williams and I did How to Be Like Walt, and so there was a lot of material that I had from that project, but this was a whole new project, and I just learned an awful lot of new information about Disneyland. So it was just, and I showed the manuscript to Peggy, and then she said, well, here's some other things that you ought to have in the book. Did you know about this? Did you know about this? And she kept throwing information. So she was a fantastic resource. And the whole thing started when I was at the park one time with my family just a couple of years ago, and I got to wondering how much of the things that I'm looking at, how much of Main Street or Tomorrowland or whatever was here when Walt was here, and how much of it has been replaced or done away with in one way or another. And so that made me curious, and that was the spark for the book.
I've had the same question, like I said, like about the railing, like with the picture with Walt's hand on the railing. I always wondered, like, is that the railing that he used to hold on to coming up and down the stairs? Like, it's a fascinating idea for a book, and it's so neat to go through it. And I've read it twice, and I'm such a Walt Disney nerd, and I love reading that stuff, and I love finding new things. Like, I knew about it, but I love reading about the intimate apparel shop on Main Street. Like, I love that was there. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't go in that door anymore, right?
That's correct.
It's just but it's a part of a different store, I think.
Yeah,
right?
It's the China store, and they just extended it back, so you can't go through that door. But it's a nice porch. It's the only porch there along Main Street where you can kind of sit and watch people go by. It's just a nice place.
Yeah, and it's like, who knew that they sold women's intimate apparel on Main Street, USA? That's a crazy story. I think it just must have been that Walt was so desperate to get as much, subsidizing and get as much money into the park, so he could build it, because he was trying to get money from every place he could to build the park, because it was really a struggle to get it built. I mean, you look at Disneyland today, and people think, it's obvious. How could it miss? So it's hard to imagine a world without Disneyland. And yet at that time, very few people believed in it. Everybody thought he was going to lose his shirt, and it was a real struggle for him to finance the park. And so even having somebody, an intimate apparel shop, come in and set up shop on Main Street, that made sense as far as bringing money into the park. So. And that always cracks me up about people when, like, Starbucks came in, or when you have different, like when the ice cream parlor would change hands and it'd be a different brand name, a different big company on a name in Disneyland or Walt Disney World, and people say, like, you know, the I don't want to use a bad word because it's a G-rated podcast, but the people who I think for some reason are so against change say, well, Walt would be turning over his grave if you heard that. Walt took every sponsorship he could literally get to get that park opened.
Yeah.
Like, people forget that, you know, there was a name on almost every store when that place opened on Main Street because he needed the money. He couldn't afford it. I love the story in your book, too, that tomorrow, and I was, here's, my plan was to go land by land, but I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. But the story about,
That's fine.
The story about Tomorrowland, when it almost didn't get built, right?
Yeah.
And then Roy ended up convincing him to take, was it money from all different places he didn't want to take money from? Or I'm sorry if I don't get the story correct.
Yeah. I do know that Joe Fowler told him that he should not. Joe Fowler was the admiral who he brought in to build the park, to be the construction supervisor of the whole park. And so Fowler told him that, you know, there's no way we're going to be able to do this and that. That included the Mark Twain. They were going to have to put that off. And Walt said, no way, we've got to have the Mark Twain. And we've got to have Tomorrowland. But initially, Walt gave in and said, oh, okay, we'll hang a sign on the Tomorrowland entrance saying it's under construction, and we won't let people go in there. But then it just nagged at him that he wouldn't have Tomorrowland. So he said, somehow we've got to get this thing built. And so I think it was primarily his brother Roy that managed to go out and get sponsorships. So they had a bunch of things that were really infomercials. They weren't really attractions. But the House of Color, what was the paint company? Dutch Boy, I think it was. And there were all these different attractions where they brought in the corporations to basically just create commercials for people to walk through. And so Tomorrowland was really the least, I think, Walt's least favorite land at the time that it opened, but at least he had it open. And he did have some really good attractions, including Utopia and the Rocket to the Moon and the 20,000 Leagues exhibit and things of that sort. So what was the original question?
No. You answered it perfectly. It was
okay, good.
It wasn't really a question. I just asked how he funded and what he first started out with in Tomorrowland. You answered it perfectly.
Oh, yeah. Then because tomorrow is always a moving target, the future is always a moving target, there's almost nothing in Tomorrowland that was there when Walt was there. Yeah. It's just been changed so much. But if you want to look for the places where Walt's legacy still is, where you find his, at least figuratively, his fingerprints, Main Street is very little change from Walt's time. It's almost exactly the way it was. I mean, that some of the stores have different names. The Upjohn Apothecary isn't there anymore, but you've got other shops there. But the architecture and everything is the same as when Walt was there. So the Main Street would be probably the most Walt character. Walt's original plan is where you can find Walt's fingerprints there, and Tomorrowland the least.
Yeah, two things. Now I have two questions to ask you on that. So my first one is, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed so I remember the second one. But my first one is, what do you think? Listen, you've studied Walt as much as anyone I know. What do you think? What do you think he would think about Tomorrowland today? Is it a case where this needs to get changed and this isn't working? That's how I feel. Or is it something else altogether?
Yeah, I don't think he'd be totally happy with it. His people mover is gone. There, and then they tried the rocket rods there. That didn't work, and now they can't really take out. You've got the whole structure there for the rocket rods and the people mover, the elevated track for it, and so forth. And because that's integrated so much, a lot of it is structurally integrated to some of the buildings, the show buildings, and so forth, that you can't really take that out. It has to stand there as sort of a reminder of attractions that no longer exist in Tomorrowland. He wouldn't be terribly happy about that, but I think he'd love Star Tours. One of the main things that that sparked the idea of this book was I got to wondering about Space Mountain, because Space Mountain that attraction did not exist in Disneyland until 10, 11 years after Walt passed away. And I thought surely that Walt didn't have anything to do with that. But as I researched it, I found out that that Space Mountain was Walt's original idea, only he was originally going to call it Spaceport. And then he got John Hench and some other Imagineers to work on this thing. And then that was in 65, and then Walt passed away in 66, and that stopped all the work on Space Mountain at Disneyland. But then they started building Walt Disney World in Florida, and they were looking for some kind of a thrill ride in Florida because they weren't going to build the Matterhorn again. And so then they revived Space Mountain, built it in Florida first, and it was such a hit, then they built it in Disneyland. But Walt originally envisioned Space Mountain, or Spaceport as he originally called it, as an attraction at Disneyland. And if you look at some of the maps of Disneyland that, the souvenir maps that they published in about 65, 66, it actually shows the Space Mountain structure where it was going to be, and it's called Spaceport. Even though the attraction wasn't open yet, they did have it on the maps. I find that fascinating that they would frequently put attractions on the map, even though they had not built the attraction yet, and sometimes didn't ever build the attraction.
Yeah, I think Walt Disney World got very famous for that. Yeah, especially with Epcot and the countries that were coming to the World Showcase Pavilion, but yeah, just like was it Edison Square that was supposed to come to Disneyland? Yeah, and it never. I think they had signs up for that at one point, and it never got built.
They certainly had it on the map for years. They had Edison Square and Liberty Street,
right.
And those are where the Spaceport, Space Mountain eventually went in. So,
wow. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Now, see, I learned stuff from the book, and now I'm learning stuff on the show. This is awesome. The other thing I wanted to, now I have two questions. I'm sorry. The other one was, I had a question about, or at least to ask you about the Penny Arcade. But before I get back to that, the Rocket Rides track, what's funny is I knew it was there, and I had ridden the monorail a bunch of times when I was in Disneyland before this last trip, but I didn't really know what to look for. And then I talked to a friend of mine, and she was like, this is, look for the track that has all like the needles and leaves on it, and you'll see where it is. And now you can't help but see it when you're on the monorail. It's this huge structure that's just left there. And it's not, I got to think of the right word. It's interesting, I guess, to me that it's still there, and that because the ride was such a flop. Actually, it was so much of a flop that I was saying I was talking to Bob Gare, when I talked to Bob Gare about it, he mentioned at least twice in a half-hour conversation how much he hated that attraction. So it was just really funny. But it's hard. You're right. It's kind of this reminder of, okay, the People Mover was here, and people enjoyed it, and it's still in Walt Disney World. But now we had this failed attraction, and now we just have this remnant of this failed attraction. It's still there. It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they could do with it, but it's a bummer to see it out there because it's, I've read about things like the Viewliner back in the day, and the Midget Autopia and stuff that they got rid of kind of quickly. Right. But Rocket Rides, I think that has to be the ultimate Disneyland failure that they've had in decades.
Yeah, I would say so. I remember going on it with my kids, and we enjoyed it, but it was always breaking down. There was an incredibly long line. People wanted to ride it, but it just the real problem was that it just broke down all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be. It was technically a thrill ride, right? Like it was supposed to go kind of fast.
Yeah, but the problem was that it was on the People Mover track,
right,
which was not banked, and which the people mover was, wow, how fast that thing go? About 10 miles an hour or something?
It's not very fast.
And so the rocket rods, those things would accelerate like crazy, and then you'd come to the first turn, and it would slow way down and crawl around like a people mover, and then speed up again. It was kind of a weird experience that was a lot of acceleration and deceleration, and that probably had a lot to do with the reason why the thing didn't operate too well.
Yeah, well, I got to say, I'm not terribly bummed out that I missed that one, but I am kind of bummed that I missed the people mover out there just because it was a classic kind of attraction.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to mention to you about Main Street USA was the Penny Arcade. And I remember going in there, and Walt Disney World lost its Penny Arcade a while back. And I remember walking in there, and just I love that place. And it still has the organ that Walt bought inside it. I think it still works. I don't remember it not working. But I took my kids in there, and we just walked through this past trip, and they have Kindles, so they're 4 and 6 and have Kindle Fire, so they were like, okay, whatever. But to me, it's such a cool throwback, and I'm so glad that they still have it there.
The Orchestrion.
Is that what it's called?
I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Welty, or I think it's a Welty Orchestrion, and it was built in 1907, and Walt purchased it himself in 1953. I'm not sure if he planned to put it in Disney. I bet he did. I bet he purchased it for Disneyland, but it was his own. I mean, there again, you looking for something that is Walt himself in the park. That Orchestrion in the what is it in the Candy Palace, or is it in the Penny Arcade? Anyway, it's in that area there.
I think you mentioned it, maybe, I don't know. I thought Penny Arcade, but I might be way off on that, so don't.
But it's there. It was there since the opening day.
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
I think they took it out for some refurbishing, but essentially it's been there since opening day.
And they have things like there's a love tester machine, and I remember using that. My wife and I on our honeymoon, we were playing with it, and it's so neat to have those throwback games there that that my kids will never see. Like, they'll never see that anywhere else but there. So it's such a cool thing. So okay, I don't. I'm watching the clock, and I have a lot more to ask you. So I don't want to rapid fire at you, but one thing that I found again, and I'm still on Main Street, so I'll try to go quick. But a story that you have that I've always heard about, because I'm sorry to go back to Walt's apartment, but about Walt's apartment was that somebody shimmied up the fire pole when either Walt was in there or whatever to get in to his apartment, and you heard that, or you have in your book that story may not have been true, that he may not have been in there. That's my surmise based on where the fire pole comes up, because Diane Disney said that it came up in a closet. And I've not been in the apartment. Did they show you the pole? Did they open the closet and show where the pole came up? So I got into a little bit of trouble because I had read your book, and our VIP guide was giving us the tour, and so where the pole would have come up is somewhere in the little narrow hallway where there's an old door. It's a doorway, and you could tell that it used to have a door on it, because it has the really fancy trim that all the other doorways in the apartment have. And our guy told us that there's 3 stairs that lead up to the rooftop patio from that's where the doorway is. And to the right of that is where Walt's bathroom is. And there's a closet, but it's a tiny little, there's no way you could put a fire pole in there kind of closet.
Really?
So when he was telling us the story, I couldn't help myself, and I said, "Is where the steps are, where the fire pole closet was?" And she got completely flustered and didn't know what to say. And I felt so bad because I didn't want to mess her tour up. And my wife was like, elbow me in the ribs, and she's like, "Let her tell the story." And I was like, "But I read the book, and there was supposed to be a closet where the fire pole was." So what I'm assuming is the steps that lead out to the patio, that little doorway is where the original fire pole came up. Because I can't figure out where else it would have been as far as the closet goes. So I was fascinated, and I asked her, and she just didn't answer my question, and she was fantastic. She was phenomenal. This, and I forget her name. I feel so bad. I have to ask my friend, but I think I threw her off, and the whole rest of the tour, she didn't really know how to take me. But yeah, I think that's where it had to be, was that little where the stairs are now that lead outside.
Yeah, I wonder if they hacksawed the top of the pole off.
Yeah, because it's not there. It's not in the apartment at all.
Yeah, because you go down into the firehouse and you can see it go up to a place that's sealed off on the ceiling there. But the story that I had heard, and we told the story in How to Be Like Walt in 2004, was that some intruder shinnied up the pole and poked his head up into the apartment and startled the Disney family as they're sitting in the apartment upstairs. And I found that once I found out that the pole came up inside a closet, which is what Diane said, then I thought, well, that story can't possibly be true. Somebody pokes his head up into a closet, you're not going to startle anybody.
Yeah. And who would know better than her?
Yeah. And she also said in the 2004 book, and How to Be Like Walt, we talked about Walt using that pole to get down into the firehouse and then come out on Main Street. That was a fast way for him to get into the park when he wanted to do that. But Diane said that he never used that pole. As far as she knew, he never went down that pole.
Yeah, I'd imagine he wasn't he was, by today's standards, obviously he was not an old man at that point, but I don't think I'm 38 and I can't see myself going down a fire pole. So I can't imagine he really did it, but it's cool that it's there, and it's neat that it's a story and it has a lore and like a history to it.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you was, and because this is something that I can't find anywhere when I'm looking it up, and I don't know if you know the answer. So the horse-drawn fire engine, or fire truck, I guess, it's in the firehouse. Is that the original one that they had there?
Yes. It was, that one was operating. It was carrying passengers on opening day, pulled by two horses, Jess and Bess, and that operated for 5 years until 1960. They retired it in 1960 and just parked it permanently in the firehouse.
And that's those two stalls, the horse stalls that are in there.
Yes.
They are actual horse stalls.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Wow, that's such a cool thing.
Yeah.
My kids were running around in there, and I was reading, and I'm like, I think these are real.
Yeah.
I was like, because I had already emailed you at that point. I'm like, I have to ask Jim when I talk to him if they're real. So that's such a cool thing. I didn't know, and I've been in there a bunch of times. So that's very cool.
Most of my life, I walked right by the firehouse. Never knew anything about Walt's apartment, never knew anything, never even bothered going inside to look around because, there are all these different attractions to see. You're in a hurry to get down Main Street and get down to the castle, or at least, head out to Adventureland or Tomorrowland or whatever. And I just never even bothered looking in there. I probably went with my dad back in '57 when we went, because he loved stuff like that. And so he probably took me in there and we looked around, but I didn't remember that part of the trip. But when I was taking my kids and stuff, we just head down Main Street and head out to some other attractions. But I find it fascinating now to poke around some of the history of Disneyland and Main Street.
Yeah, I again, like my poor kids. I'm like, no, we can't ride Pirates. We have to look at the firehouse for 20 more minutes. I got to get pictures of I got to get every angle in here. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they're the same way. Like they have to be like that. Come on, like they show interest and they try to be nice and they're little but I was dragging them into every nook and cranny that I could find in the park to try to get pictures, and because I feel like, and this is overstretching it completely, but you're getting a picture of history. You're getting a picture of where Walt Disney actually was, and this guy changed the country, changed the world. It's an amazing thing. It really is that you can go in and touch it. It's to me, it's the closest thing that I'll get to like a movie set. Like it's you know, and a couple things. Okay, so Frontierland, I want to combine the two, Frontierland and New Orleans Square. I'm only combining them for time reasons. I had no idea that Walt actually got to ride Pirates of the Caribbean. I had always heard that he never did.
Yeah, I had heard that too, and then I read this piece by Mark Eads, who's reporter or a feature writer with the Orange County Register, and he had interviewed somebody who was there that day. That Walt actually got in the boat. They had the boat all ready to go, and he went through the whole ride. It's not the attraction as it eventually opened, because he found a lot of things that he wanted fixed, a lot of things he wanted changed, but he did get to experience it as his guests would experience it. And then that was in July of 66, or 66. Then he passed away in December, and then the attraction opened in March of 67.
Yeah, I find it so cool that he went through and found all these issues and was like, no, we're not opening it. Fix all this, and then we'll open it. And they actually went back, the folks, the Imagineers and everyone who were in charge of that, and they fixed it. And they opened it exactly how he wanted it to be opened. I thought that was such a cool thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like stories like that, like I've never heard that one. I've never heard of something that a friend of mine told me. I don't know if you've heard this, who has been backstage at Haunted Mansion, said that when you walk backstage, there are studs, that hold the walls up, that have an imprint on them that say Walt Disney - Haunted House, because when they brought all that lumber in, it sat there for years. They had no idea what they were going to do with it. And then eventually they built the Haunted Mansion there. But I think you said it sat vacant for, they built the facade, right? And it sat for how many years?
Well, let's see. They had it constructed, I think, in 63. And I remember going there as a child and looking around and seeing this haunted house, and you couldn't do anything. You couldn't go in there. It was just something to look at there in New Orleans Square, and and it wasn't even New Orleans Square yet at that point. It was still Frontierland. So they had it. They had but there was nothing. There was no show building or anything at that time. So. Walt must have, and he had a lot of different ideas for the haunted mansion, the haunted house. There was at one point he was going to have it up on a hill overlooking Main Street, and so the whole idea of where it was going to be positioned and what was going to be in it, and it was going to be sort of a wax museum type thing for a while, and then audio animatronics came along and made it so much better than what he was originally envisioning. So it went through, but the haunted house idea was something that he wanted to do right from the very beginning, since before 1955.
That's so cool that it was, he wanted that element of like the scary but funny in that. Yeah. And he had like Rolly Crump working on that, and Gracie. I think I read in your book they had like the whole warehouse that was devoted to, their gags and their jokes, and the one night, and I actually heard this from Rolly when I interviewed him, the night when they scared the pants off the janitors when they came. It was
great.
It's such a great story, and
I'd love to hear that from Rolly himself.
I think if you want to listen to it, I think it's episode 11. I was telling you earlier that. Before I hit record, that I was in no position to interview a Disney legend when I did. But it was so cool to hear him tell those stories. And I can imagine.
Definitely look that up.
Yeah, I can imagine how scared, because this was new technology they were using. These guys weren't, the poor janitors didn't know that this stuff existed. They were making it up. So he was telling me about this thing that that used I forget, some kind of laser or some kind of sensor where you would hit a button and shoot it and the thing would explode into like 1,000 pieces, and then you would hit a button and it would go back together. And he said they had that rigged So when the lights went off, when the janitors walked in, this thing exploded right in front of them. I imagine that's what got them running out of there. I mean, and he talks about like crazy stuff that these guys were doing. Like, I think he said he went to lunch and he came back, and while he was at lunch, Yale Gracie had invented or come up with the idea of the singing bust. Like while he was at lunch, he came back and he was projecting a vampire movie onto a Beethoven bust, and it looked like Beethoven was talking. And they perfected that, and that got into the darn attraction. It's amazing.
Yeah.
See, and this was early 1960s. It's crazy to see like that kind of stuff. And another thing, like Walt Disney as a guy who could get everything out of everyone he worked with. Yeah. I love this story, and again, you mentioned it where he and X Atencio were riding the mock-up of Pirates.
Yeah.
And he tells them that he thinks it's there should be a song involved. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'd love for you to tell the story, because I'll probably mess it up, but I'd love to hear, I'm sure my listeners would love to hear how it went.
Oh, I'll probably mess it up too. But
that's okay.
But X Atencio, we interviewed him for How to Be Like Walt, and he told us this story about how Walt had he just sort of brought him over. He'd been an animator, and Walt brings him over and says, "I'm gonna have you work on attractions." And X he'd never done anything like that before. He didn't know why Walt singled him out, but Walt had this amazing ability to see capabilities in people that they didn't see in themselves. And so while X is working on the script, Walt wants him to work on the script for the attraction. So while he's working on the script, he gets this idea for a song. He says, we ought to have a song that repeats throughout the attraction. And so he came up with some little simple thing that he said it should be something like this. And he showed it to Walt. And Walt said, "That's it. That's perfect." And X was gonna suggest that you might want to have the Sherman Brothers work on this, and Walt said, "No. What you did is perfect. Those are the lyrics are great. The tune is great. Go to George Bruns and have him score it and everything." And so they like that, X became a songwriter, just like he instantly became a scriptwriter when he'd never done that before. And it's just amazing that Walt was able to see these capabilities in people that they couldn't see themselves, and that in an area that they have never tried anything before.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. Like the guy never wrote a song, and then he comes up with Yo Ho Yo Ho, Pirate's Life. Like that's crazy.
It's an unforgettable song. You can't get it out of your head.
Absolutely, yeah. And Grim Grinning Ghost is the same way at Haunted Mansion. Yeah. Like they're both that one. Well, both of them to me. Again, I've told you I'm a Disney nerd. I've had both of them as ringtones on my cell phone at different times. I mean, it's just an incredible thing. And I've listened to interviews with him, and he laughs when he tells the story, and it's amazing that the guy, and like I said, he wrote the auctioneer scene for Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, and now I have to get your opinion on what do you think about them changing the auctioneer scene.
I haven't seen it, but I'm not crazy about the idea of losing another piece of Walt's original Disneyland.
Yeah, I was so upset when I heard about it, and I get it. I get in the era of political correctness and getting everything. Yeah. I get people, but I don't automatically associate Pirates of the Caribbean with human trafficking. Like I think if you were going to take it literally, you shouldn't have pirates in the park at all. Yeah. I was bummed, and I'm sure that's not something that any of the original guys would look at and think that was a positive thing. Yeah. Just like when they changed the pirates chasing the women around in circles to the women chasing the pirates. It's a bummer. Like you're losing a piece of history, and just because it happened it did happen that way, and it actually happened a lot worse than that. But
Yeah.
it's a fun ride. I don't understand why it needs to be changed, but
Yeah, there's a real genius to Mark Davis and Exitencio and people like that who worked on making this Pirates attraction in a way that you're dealing with material that really ought to be R-rated. Real pirates are scary. That's scary stuff. But what they did is they made something that's very fun and harmless out of these cutthroat pirates. It's amazing that they were able to do that, and yet it is sad to see it kind of being chipped away at the original attraction. The Johnny Depp editions and so forth. I'm not that crazy about it, and I'm not that bothered by it. But it's when you've grown up with the original, you just kind of hate to see it change, just because it takes away a little bit of the memories that you grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, again, I didn't get to Disneyland until I was an adult in my almost 30, I guess. But the Walt Disney World version, obviously, I got to see a lot, and yeah, it's a bummer. I was glad that I got to take my kids to see it's not the original, obviously, because they changed it a lot, but to see the auction scene as it is now before it's changed.
Yeah,
because and it was funny walking around the park. I saw so many people with the "We Wants the Redhead" shirts and the pins, and I wonder if it's going to be another Mr. Toad when that goes down for rehab. Are they going to have people sitting outside protesting it?
Yeah.
I mean, so you know what, Jim? I'm so sorry. I have so many more things to ask you, but I don't want to keep you very much longer. So, I wonder if you would be willing to come on another one of these with me at a different time and talk more about what's still around in Walt Disney World. I'm sorry, and Disneyland, because I literally have another page of things that I wanted to talk about with you.
Yeah, let's do it again. I'd love to do it. I'm having a lot of fun talking about Disneyland today.
Oh, this is a lot of fun. It's so
much fun. By the way, did you get to see the test wall?
So I did, and I emailed you. I had emailed you that I hadn't seen it. I didn't even know it was there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I didn't know until recently.
Could you kind of quickly explain what it is? Because I don't think my listeners have any idea what the heck it is.
Yeah, and off of, as you're going down Main Street and you get to Center Street where the market house is, you hang a right down to beside where the lockers are on Center Street. You have to sort of go around the corner there, and then you see this wall that is made of bricks, and there's a drinking fountain in the center of it. And there are two different kinds of bricks. There are nice, even bricks on the left-hand side, and then on the right side are these very irregular bricks, and it's sort of divided right down the middle. And they call it the test wall because people have believed that the wall was designed to show Walt different kinds of bricklaying styles, masonry styles, and with the idea that he would choose this or that to go on a certain building or something of that sort. But I have a different theory, and I came to this theory after the book was published, and I guess I'll have to put it in a second edition or something. But I think that what the test wall really is a transition wall. And I think when Walt was going to build Liberty Street, which was originally supposed to open in 1959, and now does not exist in Disneyland, never was built, but Liberty Street was going to be cobblestone streets, 13 buildings, one for each of the original colonies. They were going to have an apothecary and a glass blowing studio and a blacksmith shop and so forth. This was all, I believe they were going to use these old bricks. And you live there in Philadelphia. You've been to the Independence Hall.
I have.
And you've seen the bricks of Independence Hall, and they are these old-time, irregular-looking bricks. And that, I believe, is what the right-hand side of the test wall is. There are these kind of bricks, and what this is you walk past this brick wall, and on the one side you've got Main Street bricks, and on the other side of the wall you've got Liberty Street bricks, and that eases you into, that's your transition into Liberty Street. And what is there now is a big door that is for cast members only, but originally I believe that was going to lead you into Liberty Street, into Liberty Square, and there would be this whole American Revolution era town there, which and now that I believe they did build something like that at Walt Disney World, didn't they? I've never been to Walt Disney World,
You
but
haven't?
No, I never have.
Oh, Jim, we got to get you out here. I got to get you to Walt Disney World. You got to check it out. Yeah, they have an entire land. We have Liberty Square that has, it's the Hall of Presidents and their haunted mansion, and we have the Muppets down there now. I mean, the Muppets.
Awesome. Yeah.
But yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I actually never would have put that together in my head. And it made me think of, we have a street here in Philadelphia called Elfrist Alley. And it's the oldest residential street in the country. And it is very much like you would think the oldest residential street in the country would look. It has the curved, almost like a triangle street, because people used to throw their trash and waste into the street and it was run down. And it's you can't drive a car in it because it's too narrow. And there are concrete barriers on both sides of the sidewalk just to make sure that people don't drive a car down there. But it's from the early 1700s. And it is a complete one full block of houses from that era that people live in still, that have never had been there. There's a historical society now that protects it, that they technically, when you look inside the houses, they have, and they'll give tours, and at Christmas they do a really cool Christmas display, but they're all privately owned. You can get tours of certain ones, and when you buy the house, you have to sign a contract that you will maintain that history of the home. But it doesn't mean everything. Like some of these houses are multi-million-dollar homes now.
Sure.
And they're, have hidden flat screen TVs behind the original fireplaces and all kinds of stuff. Excuse me, I had to hit mute so I could cough. But that's what it reminds me of. Because the bricks are just like that. Like nothing looks even. There's no grid. Everything is kind of, the sizes are different and everything's, it reminds me very much of a wall that would have been built in the 1700s. And that makes perfect sense. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. And if Liberty Street had been built, there'd be no mystery about the test wall, and they wouldn't call it that. It's a transition wall, and they put the drinking fountain in the middle to sort of disguise the fact that the kind of bricks are that you're changing from one kind of brick, the Main Street bricks, over to the Liberty Street bricks. And I think there would be no mystery about it at all. But since they never built Liberty Street, that wall standing there, it makes people scratch their heads. What's this thing doing here? How come the two different kinds of bricks? This is crazy.
Yeah, because Main Street is like designed perfectly, like to the T.
Oh,
like everything, nothing is out of place. Everything has a purpose. It's, everything is, the angles, everything is just right. And
absolutely idealized.
Yeah, absolutely. You see that. And that's such a cool thing. So, I'm going to actually put a picture of that up, on the, in the show notes to this show, because I want people to kind of have a look at what that is, exactly. And yeah, like I said, I would love to have you back on, soon if you can, so we could talk more.
Yeah, let's do it. That would be great.
Awesome. Well, Jim, thank you so much.
I have enjoyed this so much, Phil. It's just and especially since you just came back from Disneyland, everything's fresh in your mind, and it's been really fun talking to you about it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. It's been so much fun for me, and when I was in Disneyland, I had my phone out and I was writing things down like, okay, I got to ask him about this. I got to ask him about this. And I had 2 pages of notes and I only got through one. So yeah, we'll have to do it. So Jim's newest book, is titled Walt Disneyland. It's still there if you know where to look. You can find it on Amazon. I'll post, the links to both his blog and the, where you can buy the book on the show notes as well. So, Jim, thank you so much. It's so much fun. And yeah, I'm going to email you as soon as we hang up, and we'll try to figure out a different day to do
Great.
part 2.
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Phil. Thanks.
And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There podcast. Thank you so much once again to my guest, author and all-around nice guy, Jim Denney. I love this book. And I hope you buy it. I hope you get out there and buy it on Amazon or buy the ebook on Amazon. It's totally worth buying, and it's just a phenomenal book. And it's so good that I've asked Jim to be on next week's show as well. Basically, I was not done with my questions for Jim, so I'm going to bring you part 2 of my interview with Jim Denney next week. As always, thank you so much for listening. It's always greatly appreciated. And all I ask is, if you did enjoy this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show on iTunes. I set up a really cool, easy tutorial for you to do that over at eartotheretravel.com/iTunes. That way, when you subscribe, you'll get the show on your listening device, whatever you use, each and every week automatically. And the rating and the review will just help more people find out about the show and listen to the show. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. And just remember, there will be a new episode of the Ear to There podcast each and every Monday morning, as well as a new episode of the Word of the Week podcast. That'll be each and every Wednesday morning. So until next time, thank you again so much for listening. Have an awesome week. Bye-bye.